Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We just sort of wrapped up thoughts on Jim Harbaugh's departure from Michigan, and now we are going to be moving on to the NBA, where last night the Phoenix Suns had a dominant win against their rivals, the Dallas Mavericks. They were trailing 16 in the second quarter, but they turned it on and came back for a 132-109 win. Early on in that game, Luka was just carving up the Suns defense. He really is. I mean, it's not breaking any news saying he's incredible, but he was a monster. Now, there was no Kyrie for the Mavericks last night, so the Suns started sending tons of pressure at Luka. Eventually, he slowed down a little bit, and that offense did as a whole. If you know about the Mavericks this year, they haven't really been the type of team to be able to win off of their defense alone. So in comes the Suns, and they just poured it on in that third quarter. Just ridiculous stuff. Devin Booker specifically was the story of this game specifically. If you look at the third quarter stats alone, Devin Booker outscored the Mavericks as a whole 22-20. He made more field goals than the Mavericks did. He had 9 shots in the quarter. The Mavericks only hit 8. The Suns shot as a whole 18 for 21 in the quarter. I don't think I've seen anything like that. It was ridiculous. And again, Mavericks not a great defensive team, but I do think that the way that they were getting these buckets, they at that point, the Mavericks were trying to, especially as Devin Booker was heating up, they tried to send extra pressure. Anytime that Booker was getting a screen, they were blitzing him. And in those moments, I think that we get to see the maturity level that Booker has developed over the course of the past couple seasons. The decision-making is just on par. And especially with this team, when you have these other very talented players, it is very dangerous for them, where you have good decision makers, you have good shot makers like Bradley Beal and company. You can't leave Grayson Allen open because he's been incredible this year. So as a whole, a masterful performance by the Suns. They've now won 7 straight games. And after a slow start to the year, they were sort of dealing with some mediocrity and a lot of injuries to their star players. They now find themselves late here in January as 26-18 and the 5 seed. Just a month ago, today is January 25th. On December 25th, they were sub 500. They were 14-15 after losing to none other than the Dallas Mavericks. So it has been a turning of the page for them. So asking the question here, have they rounded the corner? I think that in a lot of ways they have. They finally had their guys together. The true starting lineup of Booker, Beal, Grayson Allen, Kevin Durant, and Jusuf Nurkic, they have finally played the most amount of minutes out of any lineup that the Suns have put out there this year. And it is scary if you're a defense, because any one of, especially those main 3 shot creators between Beal, Durant, and Booker can get going. But there's no liabilities really. Nurkic has been huge on both ends for them. And just based off of the eye test alone, I think that he is one of the most active off-ball guys, offensively that is, in the league. Just always setting screens, making the right plays. You saw very early in the year when him and Booker, before they had the whole ensemble of their star players, he was making big plays in crunch time. And, in general, you probably don't want Nurkic to be the one on this roster making the crunch time decisions. But that being said, I think that there are worse substitutions for that. And you're talking about a big man here that is smart enough to be able to make these plays and not be a liability. Grayson Allen, I just mentioned him. He's been unbelievable this season. The only player in the NBA right now to be shooting 50, 40, 90 And not just that, he's almost shooting 50% from three. And it's not for lack of attempts. He's shooting 5.7 3-pointers per game. He's hitting 49% of those. That is ridiculous. Quickly on Nurkic, before I fully get off of him too, I think that it shouldn't come as a massive surprise in my opinion. I think that Nurkic once showed that he had a lot of potential and he was up and coming when he left Denver and was traded to the Portland Trail Blazers. He was sort of the third guy with Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum. I believe he was the starting center during their Western Conference Finals run, but really after that, it was an inability to stay healthy. He hasn't played 60 games in a season since 2019, and this year he's been available, which has been huge for them. Played 42 out of 44 games so far for the Phoenix Suns, and he's been a very valuable player for them. So I think the Suns have rounded the corner here. I think that they are to be taken seriously going forward. Now, they are still a little bit top heavy, and in the case of injuries is where I would be a little bit nervous for them, for the reason of I like their role players. I like Eric Gordon. I like Josh Okogie, Drew Eubanks, Keita Bates-Diop, Chimezie Metu. They all look good enough in limited roles. But I do worry a little bit that if they're being forced to play starter minutes in a playoff series, I mean, we saw this with Okogie last year down the stretch. It's just not enough, really. There's not enough offensive firepower. These are all fine players, and why I think it also works with them is because you have these three elite shot creators that you can stagger their minutes some, and you can have somebody pretty much on the court at all times that can go get you a bucket, which I think helps to make them dangerous. It's just a matter of if they were to lose any one of these guys, and Beal and Durant specifically a little bit on the tail ends of their career, have both struggled with injuries in the past few seasons. I think that that's where you sort of get into a little bit murky territory there. But other than injuries, I think that the concern for me really would be not having a true point guard for crunch time possessions. Now, in the past couple of weeks, that has not mattered. As I mentioned, 7-game win streak, and they have a couple of those wins coming with some close games. They had a 22-point comeback against the Sacramento Kings a couple weeks ago, in which Durant was just absurd. He had 12-plus points in the last few minutes of that game as the Suns went on a 23-4 run to help close that out after in the fourth quarter being down 22 points. That was very impressive. He ends up drawing a foul, getting to the free throw line, and hitting both of those to help them win that game. And then he had an even crazier shot just on Monday playing against the Chicago Bulls, where it was back and forth between them. DeMar DeRozan, again, he's kind of frustrating for me as far as crunch time minutes. He's always going to get to his spot, but sometimes he's just so stuck in that I think he can be a little bit mistake prone, but this was a good DeRozan night as far as crunch time buckets go. He was hitting shots, and it came down to the Suns with the ball to end that game, and Kevin Durant hit, I think it went under the radar given how much attention it really got in the moment. He got to the free throw line elbow area, and it was a Patrick Williams covering him, jumped up with the contest, and Durant almost with his arms alone evaded the contest and did a little bit of like a double clutch to sort of veer off to the left around his contest, pull back up, and then hit the shot. I thought it was ridiculous. Kevin Durant, I know that he gets a lot of slack for the move to the Warriors in the first place, joining the team that you just blew a 3-1 lead to, and he hasn't quite been able to replicate the team success that he had since leaving there. But I think that that's because Kevin Durant, the player, is far better than Kevin Durant, the GM. He has sort of not done the best job of picking which players he wants to tie himself to in the past, but I do think that this Phoenix Suns opportunity is his best one since the Nets. I mean, the lack of assets that they had to give up for Beal in that trade, and Beal is not at his best, the All-NBA player that he was a few years ago, but he's still more than capable when he plays. I think that injuries has played to a huge part of it. Expectations in Washington his last few years were very low, and now, as long as they're fully healthy, I think they're just about as good as any team in the West. Now, as far as how they match up, I worry a little bit defensively. Again, I like their role players, but I don't think that they have a ton of point of attack defenders as far as the Los Angeles Clippers, who I know that a lot this year it has become the James Harden show with the ball in his hands. But really, when you think about it, they have a lot of guys that can create with the ball themselves. Obviously, Paul George. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard. I think that Terrence Mann has sort of gotten the short end of the stick. I think he's a good player, and he hasn't gelled perfectly probably with the James Harden system. So who knows, maybe he could even be traded, but I think that there was a reason why the Clippers said that Mann was not available in a James Harden trade to Philadelphia in the first place. So I think there's a lot of talent there. The Nuggets are obviously, they're just sort of at the point. I know that they've had games where they've sort of coasted a little bit. Still some weird stuff with them on the road during the regular season. They're sub 500 the past 2 seasons on the road. But, you know, we saw how that played out in the playoffs. I feel like there's just a certain level of, you can't worry too much about the Nuggets until it gets to the playoffs and we start to see them fall apart. Now, yes, they're probably missing some Bruce Brown minutes, but I think that some of the young talent that they have, Peyton Watson in his second season, is playing really well. I think that Christian Brown has improved. You remember, he wasn't much of a factor at all for a lot of their season, then obviously really showed out in the finals for them. And, you know, they drafted 3 rookies this year, and, you know, none of them have gotten a ton of playing time, but I think that Julian Strawther out of Gonzaga has played some good minutes for them when he has been on the court. So all this to be said, I think that, and that's not even mentioning the top 2 teams in the conference that we will be getting to a little bit in this upcoming mid-season awards segment after the break. But I think that the Suns are legit. I think that teams should be scared of them. And again, I know that it comes down to health, but if all of their guys are playing, I think that they are an incredibly hard matchup for any team to match up against defensively. So that is all we have on the Suns. We're going to be sticking with the NBA as I wrap up the show talking about my mid-season NBA awards. We will get to that on the other side of the break. Stick with us.